Oh, I would put that on a t-shirt. On the front, it would say, screw your fantasy football team. On the back, it would say point blank, period. Okay, David, Meghan, I'm going to quote a song for you. The microphone master DMC caused 1, 2, 3, 4 casualties. You'll be praising D down on your knees because I'm popping in, stomping all MCs. What song is that from, Dave? Or Meghan?
Well, you said DMC, so it's Run DMC, of course.
Run DMC from Queens.
Yeah,
place we'll visit later this episode.
Got.
Yeah.
I'll give you another hint. It's like one of the first hip hop songs I can remember that used a go-go rhythm. There you go, Meghan. Capital City Go-Go.
Is it live?
Is it live? Which is the question we were asking ourselves.
Oh, very nice.
5 minutes ago. Is it live?
Very nice.
Is it live?
When you said the go thing, it just hit me hard.
There you go. These are the games you play when 2/3 of your panel is in Washington, D.C. Is it live? We were going to record this episode live. We had some technical issues. We're still recording on schedule, but you guys watching on YouTube or on cbc.ca, you're going to have to wait, the requisite 36 hours. But we're back. Another episode of Bring It In with Morgan Campbell. I don't do this alone. I do this with the best panel in the business. Joining us from Washington, D.C., Dave Zirin. Tell us, first of all, Dave Zirin is the author of 10 books with an 11th on the way, The Kaepernick Effect, which is coming up in a couple of weeks. But tell us what sports event you're looking forward to Labor Day weekend.
All right, I'm not just saying this, but Saturday, 5 p.m., Mystics versus the Lynx. And I'll tell you, it's not just because we're really into the 9th place Mystics right now in our house. We don't care what place you're in. It's also because we're getting really into listening to Meghan McPeak do these games, me and my 13-year-old son. It adds an extra level of cool to the whole proceeding. So, Mystics Lynx, Saturday, 5 p.m.
Dave, another dated reference. Like David and Meghan just always play this 2-person game every week. Y'all like Stockton and Malone. Here we go. Pick and roll all day. Meghan McPeak, also in Washington, D.C., as we referenced a couple times, play-by-play voice of the Capital City Go-Go, play-by-play voice of the Washington Mystics. Not the third panelist, but one of 3 panelists here. Meghan McPeak, Labor Day with a U, Labor Day weekend is coming up. What sports event are you looking forward to?
So unfortunately, the Mystics will be on the road for that one. So you'll have to listen to the Lynx broadcast, which is just as good. It's not me, but it's just as good.
Oh. How can it be just as good if it's not you, Meghan? That doesn't even make sense.
I gotta show love to everybody in the W. But no, I will be watching that game prior to one of my best friend's weddings. So I am actually taking the sports weekend off, but I'm gonna pseudo listen for the second time of my good friend Justin Tinsley's 30 for 30 podcast on the King of Crenshaw. I already listened to it, but on my drive, I'm going to listen to it again because it was that good, 4-part series. So I'm going to listen to the King of Crenshaw. Everybody knows Nipsey Hussle's relationship with the NBA players. So that's my sports tie-in, but I'm actually going to take a sports weekend off and enjoy my friend's wedding and just enjoy the festivities.
Okay, perfect. Well, there are no sports weekends off around here. And Meghan McPeak, you're the one from Hamilton, but I'm the one looking forward to the Labor Day with a U, Labor Day Classic, Argos, Tiger Cats in Hamilton every Labor Day. We missed it last year because of the pandemic. It's back this year. And Chris Wilson, if you're watching, I'm still waiting on my melon colored blazer. Like if you guys didn't grow up watching melon blazer CFL football, I feel bad for you because it's some of the best football ever played. We would like to talk more CFL, but it's a pack schedule this week. Oh yeah, and before we get any further into this episode, one, if you like what you're hearing, if you're a friend of the show, hit like, hit subscribe, leave a comment, talk to us on social media with the Bring It In hashtag, and also send us your suggestions for in and out topics. If you don't like what you're hearing, leave a dislike, leave a mean comment. We don't care. We're just trying to feed the algorithm. That said, on to the topic. We're talking, we are talking COVID. We're talking tennis. We're talking boxing, which is why I wore this shirt. Uncle Roger says, you don't know Meghan's favorite word about boxing. We're talking the new kings of Queens, from Queens Come Kings, right? What song was that? That was Raising Hell, which the Mets are doing right now. So we're going to talk about that. But first things first, our first story comes to us from a good friend of mine, Josh Rubin. We worked together for a long time at the Toronto Star. guy writes about like any and everything, like from beer to basketball. Now he's a business reporter. So he brings us this story about COVID-19 vaccine mandates coming to businesses in Toronto, including the Blue Jays, including TFC, Raptors, Leafs games this upcoming season. And a lot of sports fans might get upset about this and say this infringes my rights. You know what I'll do? You know what I'll do? Because I have rights, I'm going to sue. I'm going to sue MLSC. I'm going to sue Rogers for my right to go to the game unvaccinated. And what Josh's story lays out is any business, including your favorite sports team, that wants to put a vaccine mandate in place is on solid legal ground. Meghan McPeak, how do you feel about teams making this another requirement? Like, you want to come watch the game, you got to pay for your ticket or have a ticket. You got to wear your shoes, you got to wear your shirt, you got to not punch the other fans, and you also have to not spread disease. How do we feel about that?
I think that it's up to the businesses to make these decisions, and they're doing everything in their power that they have legally to try and protect the patrons of their venues. And I think it's no different when you think of the fact that firearms are not allowed in venues either. You're trying to protect the safety of those that are attending events at your venues, whether it's concerts, sporting events, conventions. You're doing everything in your power to try and prevent an outbreak of a disease. You're trying everything in your power to prevent a mass shooting if firearms are in there. So I look at, when you walk into a business and you see those placards on the windows that says, you can't have access without wearing clothing, without wearing shoes, no pets allowed unless it's a service animal, no firearms. You're just adding one more layer of trying to protect your patrons. And at the end of the day, as you mentioned, Josh Rubin put it out plain and simply that there's nothing illegal that these businesses are doing. They are on strong legal grounds. They vetted everything, from a legal standpoint to make sure that they were following the rules and doing everything legally, that they could put these mandates in place. And when you think of the fact that we are 18 months into this pandemic and it is still ravaging the world, it is not slowing down. We're seeing more and more different variants and new variants continuing to come out. So if businesses want to try and do their part to try and limit an outbreak in their venue, then I think power to them if they're doing it from a legal standpoint. I don't see anything wrong with it.
Yeah, it's just another condition for admission. And it's like, it's less like people are like the other side of this alleged debate, argues that it's discriminatory. It's less discriminatory than charging money because not everybody has money, but no matter how little money you have, you can get the jab. Like, this is the one thing that costs nothing. And if like the flip side of it, as I could see, is that, okay, if you are shrinking like the pool of potential ticket buyers, then the people left behind, the people who actually who can make it through that hoop, the double vaccinated hoop, might have to pay more because it's harder to get 50,000 double vaccinated people. But again, this is one of the things I think for the foreseeable future, like, this is a wave we're going to have to ride, where it's diminished capacity, which means that people there are going to have to pay more because these companies are going to want to charge people more. But I don't know how we get around it, because the allowing people to come in and spread disease is not an acceptable alternative. Dave Zirin, what do you make of the idea that there, even with all the science out there, there's still like pushback against the idea that teams have the right to ensure that everybody who walks in is either vaccinated or COVID negative or both?
I don't know. Ignorance is the breakfast of champions in North America. So I'm not surprised about it in the least. Look, first of all, we got to stop using the word discrimination when we talk about issues. Because, I was prevented from bringing my sandwich into an Orioles game a couple weeks ago. I was not discriminated against. They don't want outside food in the arena so they can have a functioning business inside and support a labor force that's trying to sell you food. It might be overpriced food, but that's their decision as a business. So I had to throw my sandwich away. It was very sad, but slap me in the head with a sock filled with horse manure if I come on here and say I was discriminated against. Give me a break. Second thing is, look, we're not getting leadership from the political class on this issue. Meghan's absolutely right. We're 18 months in, and you would think they're debating about whether or not to put a traffic light by the fire station. Instead of the urgency and immediacy that this issue demands. And so, if people are going to show leadership, whether it's the unions, whether it's the businesses themselves, I'm for anybody with the ability to mitigate this showing some form of leadership. And the last thing is, when you talk about sports arenas, we speak about them as private businesses, but let's be honest, these are also public trusts. Tax money goes into building them. Mm-hmm. They are community areas. This is one of the arguments why, we support the right of players to raise a fist or take a knee during the anthem. It's because these are truly public squares. They're, as much as we see them as private businesses, and as a public square, they have a responsibility to public health, and they have a responsibility to the law. And both of those things, on both of those grounds, keep out the unvaxxed.
Well, exactly. Go ahead, Meghan.
The other thing too, guys, to Dave's point is, he mentions the political side of things. What people fail to realize is a lot of the people who are telling them this whole anti-vax, narrative and not to do it and not to follow it and COVID's a joke, they're all vaccinated.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And the fact too that this isn't an inherently political debate. Remember the North Carolina State baseball coach when his team had an outbreak and they had to forfeit one of the games in the College World Series? And they asked him about vaccination. He said, I don't want to get into a political debate. It's not a political debate, except insofar as all the people arguing against science and against public health and against the responsibility that we all have to each other as citizens, they all happen to vote for the same party. That's how it's political, but it's not inherently political. It's just political actors want to make it that way. And the other way we could the other strainer we could apply to this is say, well, you can't come to these games unless you pass 10th grade science, right? Because 10th grade science, that's where you learn, how viruses mutate, how they spread. That's where you learn how vaccines work. So if you're Mr. I'd rather let my immune system fight COVID than let a vaccine do it. Like, guys, the vaccine is the weapon that you hand to your immune system to go fight COVID. The vaccine is the AR-15 for your immune system, rather than letting your immune system fight empty-handed against the tank. Here you go. So we'll put it that way, if you didn't pass grade 10 science, 10th grade science, if you're in the US, then you can't come to the games, because this is what we're talking about. We're talking about like pretty basic stuff, and that's what's frustrating. It's also basic and frustrating was the skills on display Sunday night in Cleveland, when YouTube star turned pro boxer Jake Paul took on 39-year-old retired mixed martial arts fighter Tyron Woodley. And so,
can we call him a pro boxer though?
He technically is. It's a pro. And listen, I used to do two different podcasts about boxing. And so he is a pro boxer. Like this distinction between amateur and pro boxing.
By paperwork, he's legally a pro boxer.
That's exactly it. Like almost anyone can get licensed anywhere. Here's like the only thing that would stop me from getting licensed, and it would depend on the state, right? Here I am, 44 years old. I haven't done any like competitive sports since I was probably 20. I can get a license. It's not that hard. The only thing that would stop me is if I was in one of these states where they give you they send you to an ophthalmologist because I have a hole in my left retina. And that'd be the only thing that would stop me. But if I'm in one of these places where they just only give you the vision test, they'd be like, 44-year-old Morgan Campbell, go fight. Like, it is easy to become a pro boxer. So here go Jake Paul and Tyron Woodley in 8 of the most boring, awkward, halting rounds you're ever likely to see at the top of a pay-per-view card. Jake Paul gets the decision. Cool. He gets the decision. Yay. And then here comes, listen, and I deal a lot with the publicists at Showtime, Premier Boxing Champions, even Top Rank, but they weren't involved in this fight. But Showtime, PBC, they were. Here comes the news release. Jake Paul continues burgeoning boxing career with a split decision victory over UFC champion Tyron Woodley in action-packed Showtime pay-per-view Sunday night. Now, the fights that I saw on the undercard were action-packed. That certainly does not describe the main event. Like Dave Zirin, how long can we realistically keep doing this?
As long as there's boxing, television, as long as we have a functioning civilization, or maybe even post that if we're in a Thunderdome type scenario.
I think we're about 2 weeks from the Thunderdome, but go ahead.
Okay. We'll expect some boxing, expect it to take place in such a scenario. I'm thinking of the words of Jimmy Cannon, the famous old boxing writer from the 1950s, 40s, 50s, 60s. He called boxing the red light district of sport. And I just read this great book by Gerald Horne called The Bittersweet Science, which I'm recommending to everybody.
Yes.
And you read this, and you know that this is so deep in the marrow of boxing's history, to have awful fights, to have fights that are meant just that are basically, for lack of a better term, sideshows, carnival type events, anything to bring eyeballs to the setting. Like this idea that this is Marquis of Queensberry rules and you only have the best people who are at the top of the rankings. No, that's less the history of boxing than what we saw over the weekend. So as upsetting as it is to myself, who loves boxing and who considers himself a bit of a purist, I also know that this is part of boxing's DNA. And when you think about folks who I think Morgan is referred to as odious characters, and I certainly do, like Barstool, who are promoting this thing to whitewash their racism and sexism and serve it up to a mainstream audience. I think also this is very much part of the history of boxing. Like, to be shocked that such an entity would be involved is to be shocked that there's stink on poo. It's just a part of the sport, as repellent as we might find it.
Yeah, it's like Jake Paul tells us, and his PR team will tell us, you know, that he's serious about boxing, that he wants to be a serious boxer. But like last night was the first real fight he's had where he got hit back pretty hard by a guy who had no clue how to cut off the ring and had no clue how to counterpunch. And Jake was still getting tattooed at points. And like after the fight, he didn't seem too interested in hopping back in the ring and fighting someone even tougher. Here's to me, like, I mean, there's a pretty thick silver lining to this. One is that the world got to see Montana Love, who to me was the real headliner. Like Jake Paul was on Montana Love's undercard. Like Montana Love's the guy that fights on Showtime sometimes and never gets a big audience. And Montana Love is flawed, but he is super arrogant and super entertaining. He doesn't even need a nickname. Like Montana Love is the best name in all of pro sports. His nickname is Too Pretty. And so it's the best nickname plus name combination in pro sports. So the fact that he finally got like a big platform and maybe got to pick up some fans that he would not otherwise have had, is more than a thin silver lining. That's a big silver cushion for me. And two, like what Jake Paul is trying to pull off is trying to build his record, build his resume while at the top of pay-per-view fights. And it's one thing to get people interested in 2 or 3 fights a year when you're Mayweather, when you're Pacquiao, when you're Canelo Alvarez at that level. Something complete against your peers. Something completely different to get people really super excited about the full-timer versus cab driver fights that define everyone's early career 2 or 3 times a year for those fights. And especially when you're Jake Paul, like you're not particularly exciting, you're not particularly skilled, you got to be one of the two. Now, his fans, like his hardcore fans, they will watch it. But in terms of like making all this compelling boxing content, like he is about to, like he's knocked out all the super jobbers he could knock out. And now he has to fight people that know what they're doing. And it's a much different sport. But Meghan, like you're the non-boxing nerd on here. You're the person that's more like the sports fan that kind of comes across boxing sometimes. So you're more the target for this stuff. So now what do you think of, especially like what you saw last night?
I am the real winner of this fight because I did not give Jake Paul and Tyron Woodley any of my coins along with Showtime to pay for this pay-per-view and watch this joke of a fight, because I may not be a boxing purist, but I can understand when I don't want to be fooled into watching something, when I don't want my time wasted, because right. If the past 18 months of COVID has taught us anything, it's that you need to enjoy the time that we do have, because it's not guaranteed to wake up in the morning. So the last thing I'm going to do is watch Jake Paul try and attempt to fight someone and garner any respect from the boxing world.
But Dave Zirin, like, what danger are the Paul brothers courting? Not danger, whatever. He's gonna make money either way. But in terms of making these events, I call them things, making these events look like compelling viewing. Like, what pitfalls are they courting by not being particularly exciting fighters?
Well, there are two things. There are two pitfalls. I mean, the first is that one of the number one trending topics on Twitter was rigged.
Right.
And that was because people thought that Tyron Woodley could have absolutely cleaned Jake Paul's clock if he had wanted to, but held back right when it mattered most. Now, I'm not going to comment on that in particular, but if people are watching your fight and saying it's rigged, you run the risk of showing that you're in fact boring, which is the one thing the Paul brothers cannot be if they want to go forward doing this. No one wants to see if they're developing the jab skills and the escapability of a Floyd Mayweather. No one's watching for that. People are watching because they want to see slugfests, and they want to see Jake Paul or Logan Paul get knocked out. And so for as long as they keep doing these piddling bouts, interest will diminish. It's the rules of the market. They're not going to be able to do this nonstop. The other danger they are courting is, you never know when you run up against the person who's not here for the cameras. You never know when you're going to run against the person who's not here because they're just trying to set up for a rematch. I mean, you go up against somebody who's like, you know what, that actually wasn't funny when you made fun of my mother at the press conference leading up to this. And so I'm going to hit you for real. And any fight between a real boxer and the Paul brothers will not end nicely for the Paul brothers.
We got to move on to my favorite part of my favorite part of the week. The show is my favorite part of the week. In and Out is my favorite part of my favorite part of the week. And so here we go. I toss these topics up to Dave and Meghan. They tell me if they are in or out on this thing. All right. So here we go. Francisco Lindor, Javi Baez, Kevin Pillar. They're out here giving each other the thumbs down, like, here, this is like their new celebration and giving it to the fans. The Mets are not good. I don't have their record in front of me. They've been losing a bunch of games, but they beat up on the Washington Nationals on Sunday. The Washington Nationals are very bad. So the Mets were feeling themselves. They start giving the thumbs down. And so reporters asked what the thumbs down was all about. And Javi Baez explains that, here, let me find this quote. It's just the booze we get, is what Baez said. Baez is hitting 210, by the way, as a Met. We are not machines. We're going to struggle. We're going to struggle 7 times out of 10. Baez is struggling 8 times out of 10, but I digress. It just feels bad when I strike out and I get booed. It doesn't really get to me, but I want them to know, the fans, that when we're a success, we're going to do the same thing. Let them know how it feels to get booed. So Javi Baez basically said what the deal was. It's these players booing the fans for booing them, even though the fans were booing them for not playing well. And like, predictably, so Kevin Pillar gets involved. Marcus Stroman predictably jumps in, starts tweeting that this is all actually just a media conspiracy. But my question to you, Meghan McPeak, is, are you in or out on the Mets in particular, athletes in general, giving their own fans the thumbs down?
I mean, it's tough because if you want them to pay the price of the ticket to come back, you don't want to necessarily piss them off. But at the same time, if the Mets are that boring, I mean, they might be bored themselves and have to entertain it. So I'm here for them entertaining themselves. So I'm in on that. But I'm out on blatantly antagonizing and alienating your fan base, because if you're that bad, who's going to pay to watch you be bad?
Yes. Which is why Sandy Alderson, who was it, Alderson, Dave, that sent out that statement last night basically saying the players are wrong, fans are always right, please don't hate us any more than you already do. Dave Zirin, you in or out?
Oh, well, before I talk about whether I'm in or out on it, we do have to say it wasn't just Alderson. You would have thought the Mets held a Bible burning right. I mean, my goodness. I'm talking about the so-called baseball purists, the Keith Olbermans, the beat writers for the New York Press. I mean, the fainting couch outrage by a couple of thumbs downs was unbelievable. And this, again, we were talking about this with boxing. This is a crisis of history. I mean, Ty Cobb would go into the stands to beat up fans. Like, they act like giving a thumbs down is the worst thing we've ever seen from baseball players in terms of their relationship with fans. For Ty Cobb, the Malice at the Palace was called a Wednesday. And this Mets team is just spiraling downward. I mean, I'm someone who was raised a Mets fan. I'm from New York, so I can tell you, my buddies in Queens earlier this summer were like, we're in first place. We are chilling. And now they're horrible. And so to me, it's like, if players want to boo back, I mean, this is the Jake Paulification of sports. You know, it's like they're getting heat. The opposite of love is not hate, but indifference. Mm-hmm. And if they want to generate some hate, it's better than the indifference, which is right now looming over Queens in the wake of this late season fade.
Yes, I'm all the way in. Now, to your point, like in boxing, we see this all the time. Like we said last week, like heel wrestlers, that's what you do, but you usually do it like in the other person's hometown. Like when Ravishing Rick Rude used to come and tell all the Tennessee hillbillies to shut up while you show the ladies what a real man looks like. Or like Bernard Hopkins, when he went to Puerto Rico before the Tito Trinidad fight for the news conference, and took the Puerto Rican flag and stomped on it, and then literally had to hop on a helicopter to escape the news conference because they were ready to drag him and have the fight right then. I understand that. Now, if you want to do that to your own fans, I don't care. Listen, do what you want. Do what you want, because the other thing about baseball is it can, especially this time of year, it can be really boring. It can be really boring. Like, the biggest thing I usually miss about the end of baseball season is just like having some white noise in the background, and so I can get my reading done, right? Like, what else am I going to do how am I going to get my reading done when baseball season ends? So this, like, I don't know why there's any reason to be angry over this. This is entertaining. If they want to do it to their own fans, they can work out the relationship they want to have with their fans, but like, I'm not going to tell them they can't do it. It is strange though that Javi Baez, like, as they say these days, said the quiet part out loud. Topic 2. One of my favorite NFL players, J.K. Dobbins, running back for the Baltimore Ravens, blew out his knee on Saturday night, I think it was. Diagnosis came today, was published today, torn ACL. And predictably, fantasy football owners start whining about what this is going to do for their team. Oh, how am I going to replace this running back on my team? Oh, my poor fantasy team. This man has a torn ACL. Looking at several surgery and several months of rehab, you're worried about your fantasy football team. Dave Zirin, you in or out on the idea that fantasy sports brings the absolute worst out of sports fans?
I'm 1,000% in, because the great impact of fantasy sports is that it's put fans in the position of identifying with management instead of the players. And that's a cultural shift. Instead of growing up to want to be J.K. Dobbins, you grow up wanting to trade J.K. Dobbins.
Right.
And that's messed up. And I also, just a side note, you know, armed with my 13-year-old son, I've met my share of athletes over the years. None have been nicer or kinder than J.K. Dobbins. And so when he went down, I mean, there was actual, borderline trauma in my home. My son has a signed jersey by him, gloves that have this prominent place in his room. J.K. is just such a cool guy. And so then to see on social media people immediately being like, well, who do we replace him with? It was just like, come on. It's like, show a little bit of class. And I know that's asking a lot of Twitter and a lot of football fans, but that one rankled.
Yeah, and I'm in on that idea for the exact same reason. Like, with fantasy sports and football in particular, because it's the most violent team sport, is that it takes a group of people and fans who are already predisposed to seeing players as not human, and prompts them to see players as even less than human. So I'm with Lindor, Pilar, Baez. I give the big thumbs down to like every fantasy football owner that was complaining about J.K. Dobbins blowing out his knee, because you know who has bigger problems ahead of him? J.K. Dobbins, because they're putting his ligaments back together, and now he has all these months of rehab. Like, thankfully, at this point in history, you can come back from an ACL injury and pretty much function at the same level. It's not like when Gale Sayers did it and they had to wrap you up in a hip to ankle cast for all these months and then like you were never the same. But it's still all these months out of his life, and nobody wants to be in a hospital right now like with all these COVID patients, because you same people that complain about these football players getting hurt, a lot of y'all are the same ones that don't want a shot, don't want a mask, and are filling up the hospitals because y'all are sick. And now here's J.K. Dobbins having to navigate all this to get his knee fixed to make you people happy. This is nuts. Meghan McPeak, you in or out?
I am in on sharing the love to J.K. Dobbins. I am out on fantasy football teams and the trolls in their parents' basement trying to make money off of fantasy football and getting pissed when an athlete gets hurt. This is their livelihood. Football contracts are not guaranteed. You have bigger things to worry about as a football player than what your trolls on Twitter fantasy football team is doing. Like, I don't care as an athlete if I screwed up your fantasy football season. Like, I don't care. Right. I just blew out my knee and my career is now in jeopardy. Screw your fantasy football team. Point blank, period.
Oh, I would put that on a t-shirt. On the front, it would say, screw your fantasy football team. On the back, it would say point blank, period. Last one. Molly Seidel, I think is how you pronounce her last name, but she is an American distance runner, big star to the extent that a college distance runner can be a star, but really accomplished athlete at Notre Dame, has now converted to the marathon, graduated to the marathon. In her third ever marathon in her life, she won an Olympic bronze medal out there in the heat in Sapporo, Japan. So she's on a flight the other week and she tweets about it. Here's the quote. On my flight, was talking to a guy next to me and it came up that I run. He starts telling me how I need to train high mileage and pulls up an analysis he had made of a pro runner's training on his phone. The pro runner was me. It was my training. I didn't have the heart to tell him. Meghan McPeak, since you're laughing the hardest right now, Molly did not flex on this guy. She didn't give him the, like, do you know who you're talking to? Right? Which she could have. So are you in or out on Molly Seidel deciding not to blow up this mansplainer's spot?
I am out. Molly, girl, flex hard. Flex as hard as you can on this man. He tried to tell you about yourself while telling you about yourself. Girl, flex on him. You had the moment. You had the opportunity. That would have been an even better story if she mansplained. Like, mansplain to the mansplainer.
Oh, I like it because like it's sort of like an inside joke between her and like the whole rest of the world, and this guy's still walking around not recognizing the.
He knows now because he's probably trending.
Yeah, that's true. If he knows her training, he must follow her on social media. Before I tell you guys whether I'm in or out, here's another old school hip hop reference. I think Dave can finish this line. We'll tell you my answer. Dave, what happens after La Schmoove?
We got nothing to prove.
Exactly. If you guys know the Fushnikins, Meghan is the group that, well, we always got it because Meghan's young, so we got to bridge the gap for her. Shaquille O'Neal had a track with them. Last move, because we ain't got nothing to prove. Molly Seidel has nothing to prove to this guy. Nothing. And so to me, it's funnier just to let him strut through the airport thinking that he really educated you. Not realizing, like, the sad part is like whatever is wrong in his analysis, he might go pass that on to whoever he thinks he's coaching. But like Molly doesn't have to.
She should have told him to airdrop it to her. So then when her airdrop pops up on his phone, it's Molly Seidel.
There you go.
Yeah. Can you airdrop me that article, please?
I'll ask my coach what he thinks of this, and we'll see if we can integrate it. But the thing is too, like, I've had people try to mansplain sports to me, and I'm a man. Like, I was at like the Bills were playing the Bears in the Rogers Center, and it was when the Bills had Pat Washington and the other like huge guy at defensive tackle, and the Bears just kept trying to run the ball, and you couldn't do anything because those two guys took up so much space, and the linebackers just come clean up the mess. And here I am talking to myself saying, man, the Bears need to do something besides run into Washington and I can't remember who the other guy was, Pat Williams and Ted Washington. I was like, the Bears need to do something besides run into Williams and Washington because there ain't nothing happening there. And like, I feel like this guy leaned against me, this prominent Canadian sports columnist leaning into my space with his Canadian accent, saying to me, mansplaining to me, you you run the ball early to set up the pass later. Here I am with like a Big Ten championship on my ring, and this fool's trying to mansplain football to me. So like, I get it. And I didn't give him the, you know who I am, but like, now he's the butt of a joke. Dave Zirin, you in or out on Molly Seidel deciding not to dunk on this guy?
I think I'll do what that guy should have done and not talk. I like Meghan's answer. That's my answer.
That would have done very well.
Yeah.
Perfect. So then, guys, this is rare. You have Dave Zirin saying he won't talk, which almost never happens. So we thought we were gonna get one type of special episode. We got a different type of special episode because we got Dave Zirin saying he won't talk. But this is like a momentary thing, luckily, because what we serve up here, what we dunk on people with, is conversation. We do this every week. We record every Monday. Pretty soon we might record live every Monday, but we'll keep you guys updated. Between now and our next episode, Meghan McPeak, tell the people where they can find you besides dancing at weddings.
On Twitter, as always, at Meghan McPeak, spelled with an H because it's the right way to do it.
Perfect. Dave Zirin, between now and our next episode, tell the folks where they can find you.
Well, either in a Fushnickens posse cut, can we rock What's Up Doc 2021? Or you can catch me on Twitter at Edge of Sports because Lash Move, I ain't got nothing to prove. That's why early 90s rap is always going to be better because Drake could not get away with a song called Lash Move.
No, not at all. Also, like, the fast rapper has disappeared. Like, well, Kendrick Lamar is kind of a throwback to that, but like, do you think who's the best fast rapper of all time? We're gonna narrow the field. Tretch, Chip Fu, Twista.
Oh, Twista.
What about Busta Rhymes?
He's up there, but he's a rapper who can rap fast. I'm talking about dudes. Well, Tretch barely is. Tretch 2 is also like, rapping fast is not his identity, but that's just what he does. Whereas like Twister, like his original name was Tongue Twister. He's like, listen, this is what I do. I set world records for syllables per minute. And by the time most people heard of Twister, like I'm sure all the other fast rappers are like, yo, you sold out, dude. You're down to 300 syllables a minute. What happened to you? They're like the guys at the beginning of the Michael Jackson Bad videos. Have they taught you that sissy school of yours? Rapping regular speed? What is this? Anyway, before I get too carried away, between episodes, you can catch me at Morgan P. Campbell on Twitter, at Morgan P. Campbell on Instagram. I don't have Facebook anymore. I'm too old for TikTok, so I ain't even getting started. I don't have Triller, none of that stuff. Facebook or Instagram, Twitter, at Morgan P. Campbell. Like, comment, subscribe. Tweet at us. Use the hashtag bring it in. Send us your in or out suggestions. And until then, this has been Bring It In with Morgan Campbell. I'm your host, Morgan Campbell. Y'all know poop about boxing, and we'll see you next week.